Welcome to the 2025-2026 Alison R. Bernstein Media Mentoring Program opening event. I am so excited to introduce our speaker for tonight, Janine Gianfredi. Janine is the Chief of Marketing at Transcarent, a pioneering tech medical firm that delivers an innovative all-in-one personal medical records and information app. She is the former Chief Marketing Officer of the United States Digital Service, a startup in the White House under President Barack Obama that uses technology and design to improve services for Americans. After joining in late 2015, she launched the official USDS website, developed the messaging strategy for interactions with Congress, landed dozens of articles about the president's technology agenda in publications like Fast Company, Back Channel, and BuzzFeed, and managed internal communications for a rapidly growing distributed team of over 200 people. Before joining the White House, Janine spent 10 years at Google or Alphabet, most recently as the head of marketing for Google X. In this position, she was a member of the senior leadership team responsible for marketing across the Moonshot Factory. She launched Alphabet's first autonomous unit, Verily Life Sciences, overseeing brand, creative development, and messaging. Additionally, Janine expanded the self-driving car project into Austin, Texas, leading community outreach, brand strategy, and communications in the new market. The first moonshot Janine tackled was Google Glass, driving brand marketing and partnerships to establish a new product category. She oversaw agency management, content strategy, social media, customer communications, and international expansion. Janine joined Google in 2005, where she helped to grow the New York office and preserve its culture through continuous expansion and strategic shifts. Working alongside the advertising industry's C-suite, she initiated and fostered partnerships to align marketing strategy with shifting consumer behavior when digital was considered an afterthought. A seasoned public speaker and trained media spokesperson, Janine has represented some of the world's most influential brands and has been quoted in the New York Times and on network news. A recent profile in First Round Review highlights her approach to leading and driving change in continuously evolving environments. Janine graduated magna cum laude from Rutgers University with a BA in English and Political Science, with certificates from the Institute for Women's Leadership and the Eagleton Institute of Politics. She lives in San Francisco with her husband and her dog and is an amateur chef, an inflexible yogi, a serial mentor, and a lover of travel. And this is just a little bit of all of the incredible work she has done. So now I'll turn it over to Janine and we can kick off the year.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that incredible introduction, Nishi, and so much for having me today as well. I was just so excited to sort of start my September, even though I know we're already a couple weeks in with this conversation. So you heard a little bit about my background. I think I can give a bit more color on that. But I guess one of the most important things I want to leave you with tonight is that even just hearing that sort of retrospective of the last 20 years, what I can tell you is that the job that I took at Google 20 years ago was not something I even knew existed when I was in college. And the job that I have now looks nothing like the marketing that I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I kind of have no idea what this field will look like in 10 years. I have some hypotheses, but things are moving so quickly that I would say if there's one thing everyone in media and communications, in marketing, and technology can keep their eye on, it's that one of the most important assets you have is your ability to continuously learn. It is probably the biggest way to stand out right now while everyone is talking about artificial intelligence, consolidation, and everything that else that is happening. I can promise you that the reason I've been able to go into tech with an English and political science degree, go into the federal government with zero experience working in the government except for one internship while I was at Rutgers, the state of New Jersey, into social media. I worked at Instagram for several years and then into healthcare was sort of an insatiable curiosity. No problem ever showing up with beginner's mind and learning anything from scratch, not being intimidated by things that are new. And I kind of giggle when I hear the that bio, which I probably should refresh a little bit. But for many of you on the call, I started at Google when Gmail wasn't a publicly, it was in beta. It wasn't a publicly released product. The company didn't own YouTube yet. And we had a tiny little sliver of the advertising budgets that were out there. And we really were going into rooms with marketing leaders, with advertising leaders, telling them that behavior was changing and people weren't just watching TV, reading the newspaper, and listening to the radio. And then fast forward 10 years at Google, I was working on what is now Waymo, the self-driving car project. And I was telling people, I deeply believed this 10 years ago, and I'm like excited that I live in a city now where there are Waymos driving all over. But 10 years ago, I was like, no, we are absolutely going to live in a world where cars drive themselves. And people honestly thought this was like off the wall, complete science fiction. I live in a city now where the number one ride sharing app is Uber. The number two is Waymo. The number three is Lyft. Waymo's actually eclipsed Lyft. That's how popular they are. When I went into the government, I had so many people say, you got to be kidding. Nobody can make the government better. It doesn't matter how much you care. It doesn't matter if you are techie people, if you are design people. And I joined this team, the United States Digital Service, that President Barack Obama really empowered. He gave us a lot of autonomy to do good work in the government. And we were able, it's slow, I will not say it's a fast-moving journey, but we were able to slowly make things better in the government, project by project, website by website, application by application. That brings me to where I am now, which is healthcare. I spent almost 2 decades working in different parts of the tech industry, and I took a little bit of stock of what I was doing, and I decided that there were sort of three main issues that I saw really, or still see really, plaguing our future as a country and a society. And to me, those three are the environment and our need to make sure that we have some level of stability and resilience in our changing planet. The second is healthcare and the fact that in this country in particular, and unfortunately globally, more countries are following this trend of the United States. We're spending more money on healthcare and we're getting sicker. So something is not working there. And the third being income inequality and the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. Those three issues are really deeply intertwined from a policy perspective, from a structural perspective. But I decided I wanted to work in one of them. And so I ended up deciding to move into healthcare, where I've been for the last couple years. And in so many ways, I feel like the work I'm doing today resembles the work I did 20 years ago at Google, where yet again, we're saying to people who don't really believe things are changing or they don't believe things can change, that, hey, if you actually look at things from an individual person's point of view, get yourself in that user mindset, use technology, you can change things. So I'm giving you a little bit of color on my background that's like not quite in the bio. I can pause, Nishi. I'm happy to dive right into the topics unless there's an area you want to steer me into.
No, I think we're all interested in all of your expertise and whatever you have to say.
Okay, okay. Just want to make sure. Um, one uh, major shift, I would say, that I'm seeing right now in media marketing. I don't even know that I would define it that narrowly. I would say generally in organizations. I mentioned a little bit about learning, but I think something I'm seeing a very fascinating shift for me personally is a little bit of a pivot to what I would call a liberal arts brain and a liberal arts mindset. I'm a little colored in my perspective here because I did start my career at Google. So I was one of those folks who came into a technology company that was dominated by an engineering culture and incredibly brilliant PhDs in computer science from the best universities all around the world. And I came in with my English and political science degree. And I think for the very probably the first decade of my career, I had persistent, constant imposter syndrome that because I was not a technical person, I didn't necessarily deserve a voice or my viewpoint was not informed by the right education or expertise. It wasn't a daily thing. It happened in different periods throughout my career, but it was often very hard to be that person in the room that didn't have that technical point of view. Although I have to say, when I left Google, out of the tech industry, I was like, oh, I actually know a whole lot more about technology than I've given myself credit for. But sometimes it's hard to see that when you're in it, when you're like deeply in it. Um, what I have seen the last couple of years, and in my little crystal ball, I think is going to accelerate massively as AI adoption picks up, is we're going to see a pivot around the value that is placed on people who have a bit more of that liberal arts mindset. And I'm not in any way saying that people who've studied engineering don't have this mindset. I'm not saying this is attached to a degree in any way, shape, or form. But people who are able to look at things from a whole bunch of different perspectives and figure out how to weigh a problem, what is like really a problem in search of a solution versus what is a solution in search of a problem. That requires a fair amount of situational awareness and strategic awareness and the ability to take in perspective in a way that, sure, AI can certainly intake a lot of data and give you a perspective, but that sort of human side of it, understanding the human pain point, asking the really tough questions, sparring with a human, or now we're sparring with AI, less so on the sort of real technical side of coding that again, we're still coding a whole lot. That is not going away. But I do believe we're going to start to shift a little bit more towards this critical thinking mindset in terms of the rooms where decisions are happening. I worry that as I say that, we're watching education lean out of critical thinking in a lot of places, and we're seeing at the younger levels of the education system, it is how do we get AI, how do we get technology into these kids' hands as soon as possible. And I think it's going to become more important than ever that we understand how to dissect problems, look at things from another point of view, make decisions without having all the information, but based on some level of signal. Because I think we are moving into a world that is just a lot more uncertain. We have been moving into a world that's a lot more uncertain. And I think particularly in the business world, that is expanding in a way that is frankly making people very, very uncomfortable. I love to take questions in the middle. So Christina, I see your hand up and I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't sure if you're taking questions now,
Thank
but
you. No, absolutely.
so as you're talking about AI, I'm like very anxious about AI in general. Like I think there's a lot of good that comes with it, but a lot of scariness that comes with it. And I'm sure there's been that version on every generation in technology. But how do you feel like you can both yourself and encourage others to combat that idea of like relying on chat GPT or AI to like answer questions? I think like it's so scary to me to watch some people that I think are really intelligent, like rely on like something like that very regularly.
Yep.
Um, and I don't want to be like, hey, you're losing brain power, but also like I know it's important to be able to work with the tools that we're being given. So how are you like encouraging that within the people you love, within your workspace?
That's a great question. And I just had this conversation with my team this morning. So I would say number one, um, nobody reads the terms and conditions that they agree to when they sign up for new technology. I have certainly not read the terms and conditions for Anthropic's Claude or ChatGPT. I'm not going to pretend and tell you that I did. I can make a guess that in the consumer version of those products, you as a user are probably giving up a fair amount of the usage of your data to the company just because that's how these terms and conditions are written. So I would start with a very strong caveat for anybody that is using the non-paid versions of these tools to expect that even if none of your data in this moment in time is being used for any purpose that you are not happy with, it is highly likely that it will be in the future. And I say that in particular because I know a lot of people are using ChatGPT as sort of a pseudo therapist. And I think it's really important to know that what you share with it, you don't know how they're going to decide to use that in 5 years. They probably don't know how they're going to use that in 5 years. I'm not saying it's going to be a nefarious use of it, right? But I'm pretty thoughtful about what information I share in a public forum, and you should treat it as a public forum. So I would put that caveat out there first and foremost. When it comes to I'll give you my view on just like the sort of ethical use of technology more broadly. But before that, when it comes to these tools, there is not an option to resist them right now if you are going to move into the private sector or the public sector in a job where you are expected to do any level of what has previously been called knowledge work. There will just be zero ability to opt out of them. It is just a fact. You might not like the fact, but it is a fact. They are going to proliferate across everything. I think the really important thing is to determine how best you can use them in a way that makes you feel good about using them. I will share with you my own personal view on them. I actually refuse to use them to like outsource my brain to them. And I force myself. I kind of do the same thing with Google. Like I've tried to retrain myself to like not Google things when I can't remember them and give myself like a 90-second rule of like you probably actually do remember the name of that movie, but if you just default to Google, you're never gonna like get your brain to use it. But figure out the things these tools can actually do to make your life better. So right now, and this is actually the conversation I just had with my team today, kind of just ask them, what's like dragging you down right now? What are the things that you get pulled away from the work you really love to do that you hate to do? Surprise, surprise, the majority of the tasks that they came back with are pretty low value tasks that take them away from doing deeper, more interesting work. And so what we're talking about is how do we use AI for those types of things? I think the narrative right now of like AI is taking away entry-level jobs, there's probably some truth in that for sure. I think jobs right now are contracting across the board, right? So it's kind of hard right now to decouple, is it AI or is it just what's going on in the economy more broadly in the political environment? What I see with my own teams is that you never actually have enough people who act as sort of that assistant to you, like the person who's maybe gathering the data for you so that you can analyze it, or the person who's like doing the first draft of an email or a blog or something like that. You're always doing that on top of your regular job. So what we're trying to do, at least where I work now, is like, okay, well, if you're spending an extra 5 hours a week on stuff that you wish you could hand over to someone else, but you can't, see if you can hand that over to AI. And again, in service to you trying to like do the highest value work. Um, it's I'm not, I think if you go on LinkedIn for 5 minutes, there's people everywhere that like make it seem like this whole thing is completely figured out. And there's companies that like have optimized their entire work environment using AI. I have not met a single one of those companies yet. Everybody's still trying to figure out what parts make sense. The other thing I would add to it though is that I've seen this so many times throughout my career, and I can share a story from early days of the Google self-driving car project pre-Waymo, but it is essential for people who have a strong moral compass and are really thoughtful about the ethical deployment of technology to sit at the tables where decisions are being made. And if you opt out of those tables or you opt out of this technology, someone else will make the decisions without having the voice that you want at that table. And so I encourage everybody who has a perspective on this and has a view for what they want the future to look like to sit at that table, no matter how scary it might be, and read about it and learn about it and do your best to shape it. It's not an easy thing to do, and you certainly are not going to shape something 100%. But I have seen many times where those ethical voices put checks and balances in place that are really, really meaningful for how technology is deployed for the people who ultimately are impacted by it and use it. The quick example I'll share is when I worked on the Google self-driving car project. Again, this was like pre-Waymo when we were in testing. The head of that project used to say to the team, I want you all to imagine that your 3-year-old child, your 3-year-old niece, your 3-year-old nephew ran in front of that car. And I want you to have the confidence to know that that car would stop. And that was always the framing. And he would say, if you weren't okay putting your 3-year-old child in front of this car, then we're not ready to get it out on the road. And it was a very powerful way to frame like the impact, but that was an extremely ethical voice at the table, like shaping the technology and the design of it. Did I answer your question? It's not
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
absolutely. Um, on that note of kind of having a seat at the table, because I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about was a bit of risk taking. And I sort of touched on it a little bit when I was sharing a little more color on my journey, my career journey. There's a lot of moments, I think, and you read about these. You've probably all read about how there's an old study that was done. I don't remember if it was McKinsey or somewhere else, where they looked at men and women who checked out a job description, and men would look at the 10 bullet points of what the requirements were for the job, and if they had three of them, they said, all right, I could do this. I'm going to apply. And if women had 9 out of the 10, they would say, oh, I guess I'm not qualified for this because I don't have 10 out of 10. It's a barrier that we put in front of ourselves. It's not an ill-informed barrier, right? We are often held to a different standard in many of these cases. But I would encourage everybody here to get really comfortable with having 3 out of 10. You probably actually have 5 or 7 out of 10 when you think you have 3 out of 10. But get really comfortable with taking that risk and putting yourself in a role that feels a little bit scary. I think every job I've had, particularly in the last 10 years, I have been a little scared to go into it. Every single one of them felt like, okay, either like I am starting in a new industry or there's a totally different remit that I'm expected to deliver on. And the more scared you are, the more impactful the experience is and the more you get out of it. Um, when I left Google, I was there for a full decade. I kind of grew up there. I joined the company when I was 25. I got married when I was there. I lost my dad when I was there. Like all these things happened when I was there. It was a very comfortable home for me. And when I left and joined the federal government, it was just a cultural 180. I had been used to working in this very fast-paced, extremely efficient environment. And then I went into the federal government. And I remember kind of walking in on the first day and having that moment of, I feel like they sort of made a mistake here. Like, why would they think I would be able to make an impact here? Like, this is crazy. I am so not the right person to be here. And then I just stepped back and, took a breath and assessed the situation and leaned in on all my learnings and really just dug in and tried to make an impact as quickly as possible. But I would be lying if I said that most of the times when I took on really cool new opportunities, I wasn't feeling completely overwhelmed by them. And that includes not just jobs, but cross-country moves, moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, a whole bunch of those things. They're fun, they're rewarding, and even if they don't work out the way you thought they did, you learn and you grow a ton. A little bit of a shift here. On sort of the media and communications side. I'm curious, maybe like a raise of hand or emoji reaction is how many of you are thinking about or just dealing with how to address world events, political events, government events, societal events, inside of organizations, outside of organizations, or like theoretically from a communications standpoint, how to yeah, probably everybody on here, right? Um, so I've been in marketing and communications pre-social media, and I've watched all the phases of it, and the phases of it are both the tools and technologies changing, but I would say what's been more significant is the broad use of them and the expectations people place on how organizations communicate their values externally and internally. And that decision making and that complexity does tend to fall to your communications and marketing teams, internally and externally. So over the last just 5 years, I guess I would say, because 2020, I think, is probably like the most significant turning point. Over the last 5 years, everything that's going on externally is also going on internally. You can't really, with COVID in 2020, right? We all took our work home with us. And even if people went back to work, even people that are back in the office 5 times, we have completely changed the way that work is. And the expectation from your employees about how you show up externally and internally has changed. I would actually say it is going through a change again. So if I think back to 2020, the combination of COVID, election security, what was going on with George Floyd, later on with the insurrection, there was a real expectation from employees and customers and users that brands have some set of values that they are willing to stand by externally. And for most companies, that meant putting in pretty robust types of frameworks on how to decide whether or not to talk about things internally and externally. And I'll give you an example that is like, it's frankly a sad example to have to communicate, but it's a very, very relevant one. There was a time when most companies, when there was a mass shooting, would absolutely issue some kind of communication internally to people to make sure that they condemned the violence, talked about how much this was impacting people's, focus and their mental health. We have had so many of those in the last several years that most companies I know, the ones that I have worked in and my peer set, those events are no longer acknowledged in organizations at a macro level because there came a point where there were too many of them to really call attention to. And there was a shift in those strategies internally where you tended to have, particularly in the more remote companies, you tended to have the HR teams try to identify all of the individuals who were in proximity to the violence that happened and do more of a one-to-one outreach. We could talk a lot about why that is and what it means for what's going on in American society, but I think the note there that I want to share with you is how much of a shift there has been. Because if I look at 2020, almost every significant event was acknowledged inside of a company. Everything that was happening, there was a push to make sure that people knew they had the right support, they had the ability to talk about things. That volume of problems happening just kind of got so big, that piece was peeled back. The other thing that I would say is shifting right now, probably within the last 6 months, is what a company is willing to talk about publicly versus the work that they are continuing inside of their organization. So DE&I is a great example. Most companies, if you look, it would be interesting to do a study on this, are much less vocal about diversity and inclusion than they were a couple of years ago. If you peel below that and talk to the people that are working in these organizations, a large percentage of the work happening to support DEI has not stopped. It is still going. The programs are still in place. They're still being measured. There's still impact from them. What has changed is a willingness to go on the record about these, or I would say what's even more likely is a willingness to put this perspective out there on something like social media, because you put your company or brand in the crosshairs and in a conversation that you may just not be equipped to have in the public forum. On a personal level, I find this sad. It's just a commentary on the moment in time that we are sort of living through right now. But from a perspective of someone who often has to make decisions on this, I can understand why these moves have been made, why we've gone in this direction in a lot of ways, because of the sort of crises that a lot of these, the communication crises that every one of these topics can spur when you have so much kind of bubbling up and brewing on the national platform about these topics. So I will say it's a painful conversation. I think it's a hard conversation that's happening in organizations over and over again. And it is a very significant shift from what was happening pre-2020, 2020 to 2022, 3, 4, and now. And I fully expect that it will change again because that is what happens. And a big part of working in communications is adapting constantly to the new information that is coming in, the changing political environment, what's happening inside of your company culture. I will pause there because I'm curious if anyone has questions on that or things that they are grappling with on this topic. There's an interesting comment on here. Shannon, there is no fourth estate, which is 100% true. It is for many publications. We still have some that have their journalistic integrity, but the number of those is dramatically decreased, and obviously local news has really been decimated over the last couple decades. I think what's very interesting from a marketing point of view is that marketing and communications over the last several of years has increasingly become a vehicle for content strategy and content production. It's a very, very effective way to get your message and your brand out in front of users, in front of customers. And it's a skill set, I would say, that is only expanding in this industry, which is how do you craft really compelling content? I would build on that, kind of coming back to what we talked about before, about sort of like the ethical standards that you want to hold yourself to and a company wants to hold itself to, that there is an opportunity when you are working in this field to look at your team, your organization, your work a little bit from an editorial perspective. I'm not saying this is an easy thing for somebody to discern, because when content is coming from a brand, you're always going to assume this is highly motivated by the brand to get me to do X, Y, or Z. But there has been a significant uptick over the last several years of brands putting out more neutral content, more neutral research. It's commissioned to do something, obviously, that they care about, or to tell a story that they care about. But it has put a more, I would say, sort of like expansive opportunity on marketers to think about storytelling and to think about communications in a way that is very different from about 10 years ago. I think the struggle I have in my own field and in my own life is I would love to see the news entities like not picking up on that brand content so readily. Like you see so much reporting happening on brand content, and that always is a head scratcher for me because I'm like, I'd love to see like a little bit more separation of those entities. It is definitely blending together. But on the flip side, I do think from a marketing and communications perspective, it can be very fun if you take an editorial eye to the work that you're doing and say, hey, we're not here to create just like sales collateral or ads. We actually can find a way to try to educate people or get an interesting perspective out there. It does present an interesting opportunity for the people that are like inside these marketing and communications organizations, but that is not what I want from the news for sure. It kind of goes both ways. Another thing I would love to just touch on is orchestration. And this comes back a little bit to what we were talking about with the liberal arts sort of brain and even AI to a certain extent as well. One of the things that I would say over the last like 2 decades that I've been in this industry is that it has gotten so complicated. Marketing, if you ever watched Mad Men, did any of you ever watch that show? Like about sort of advertising's heyday, or at least heyday for white men. Um, that was a very simple time, I would say, in marketing communications because there were a handful of channels being used. You had television, you had print, you had radio. There was a difference in how data was being applied, and consumers were captive based on the fewer set of channels that you had. What has happened to marketing over the last several years is that it has become this extremely expansive field that includes everything from external communications, PR, internal communications, events, narrative development, content development, storytelling, speaker prep, product marketing, product positioning, values, differentiation, influencing product roadmaps or co-designing product roadmaps, particularly on the technical side, because marketers tend to sit on all of the insight that an audience has, and that's what a product team needs. So sitting alongside a product team, partnership with a sales team if it's a commercial brand, or partnership with a user service team if it is more of a consumer brand, and then growth marketing, which tends to be highly analytical, sometimes also includes data science, data engineering, or broader engineering teams. If you continue to go up the marketing media environment and move into positions of more leadership, you get into a place, this comes back to being uncomfortable, where you are less and less of an expert in everything that you are leading. It is impossible. Everything that I just listed out, and I'm probably missing a dozen other things, it is impossible to have expertise in all of those things. It just doesn't make any sense, right? You cannot be an expert in every one of those, creative development down to data analytics. And so one of the things that's really important as you start to expand, if you expand more in a marketing and communications type of a role, is how can I be fluent in all of these different functions? How do I learn to ask really good questions so that I understand if things are working or are not working? And how can I guide the work and guide the strategy, even if I don't feel like I am an expert on every single one of the things that I am responsible for leading. To do that well, there's a comfort that you need to develop with data for sure. Nobody gets to escape data these days. So you have to get comfortable around what is the data trying to tell me? Or if I don't know what the data is trying to tell me, what questions do I need to ask to figure out what the signal is, or the insight is, or the information is so that I can make better decisions. The other thing is really how do you this is a word I would use, but how do you display enough vulnerability to help the people that do have the expertise really want to draw that insight and that experience out so that you are able to really lead folks more in areas where you might be a little bit more out of your depth. I think all of these come back to very, very high emotional intelligence and curiosity and a very strong willingness to just be kind of uncomfortable in not knowing, not having all the answers and not knowing how everything is supposed to work explicitly. Question.
Hi, I think on that note, I did have a question. If we can, I just want to hear a little bit more about your experience of when you did apply for that Google job, like in relation to that uncomfortableness, right? How did you, with a background in like English and political science, how did you approach like getting that interview or like landing, like getting into that? Like how did I just a little bit more about that?
I might have a story that's not replicated anymore because that was 20 years ago. So here's the real story of how I ended up at Google. I Lisa knows this very well. I graduated from Rutgers in 2002. And I had an IWL internship that started September 10th, 2001 in the World Financial Center. And I was supposed to be there at the World Financial Center in New York City on September 11th, 2001. I made a last minute decision the night before to not go to the internship because I wanted to go to my Shakespeare seminar. And I'm very grateful for that Shakespeare seminar because I was not in the city on September 11th. That shook me a lot as a 21-year-old who had kind of spent her whole life planning what was next and overachieving. And so I decided in my senior year of college that instead of getting a job, I bought a one-way ticket to Honolulu and I waited tables at the Bubblegum Shrimp Company for a year and a half on Oahu and did a lot of hiking and surfing and practicing yoga. I then returned back to New Jersey, moved back home, and it was time to get a job because I had, depleted most of my savings for my year in Hawaii. And I ended up working at a pharmaceutical company. That was just kind of where I landed. So that was sort of my first job out of college. I started in an assistant position and they promoted me into a product manager role. This again, I don't think this would happen today. I can full out say the reason I was promoted into that role was because I understood computers. That was how it was framed, which really meant I knew how to use Microsoft Office. That was kind of what it was. So I got in this interesting position where I was working between a developer team and the doctors and researchers who needed to use the technology that we were building. Lucky spot to be in because I sort of learned a little bit of more what it takes to turn requirements into tech specs, which is something again I had never thought of before. I did realize though that after that promotion, I was growing a career in something I didn't want to do. So at this point, right, I was still in my early 20s, but I thought, man, I got promoted. What if I get promoted again? What if I get promoted again? And then I look back and I'm like, whoa, this is really not what I want to be doing. On a whim, I had been using Google since 1999. I am one of those people, or 2000, who started using it shortly after it was invented. I started using it at Rutgers actually, when it was very, very different than it is today. I thought, well, I really love Google. I think it would be fun to work at Google. This was what went through my head. And I went on the website and they had a job opening for an assistant role. And I put my resume in. And what I did not know, because I really was not paying the technology, was that they went public in that time. They filed for their IPO. Google was blowing up, was growing. I didn't think about this again, and I didn't hear from them for 7 months. Here's the part where you're really going to laugh. So Gmail, as I mentioned before, was not a product yet. 7 months after I applied, 8 months after I applied, my Hotmail account, which was my main email address, in the spam folder had caught a reply from Google asking me if I wanted to come in and interview. And luckily, I checked my spam folder. And to this day, I still check my spam folder because I'm like, geez, you never know what's going to be in your spam folder. So I checked my spam folder and I called the recruiter and they were lovely. They brought me into the New York office. At the time, I was living home with my family in Bergen County, New Jersey. I went into the New York office and I interviewed with the head of sales and the head of marketing. And they said, this is an assistant position. It's the only role we have open. We don't really need an assistant, but we kind of need somebody to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We don't really know what this job is going to look like, but we like you. It wasn't just we like you. This was after 14 interviews. So I will never forget, I couldn't even speak at the end of the day. They ran you through this gauntlet of interviews. And so they asked me if I wanted to join. And I was just super excited because it seemed like the environment that I wanted to be in. That is how I got into Google. So a little bit probably of an unorthodox. What I can tell you though, for the next 10 years, because I kind of had 4 careers at Google. So in that 10 years, I changed, I moved out of that assistant. I was really not a good assistant to this day. I'm I think my own assistant wants to kill me sometimes because of how disorganized I am. But I moved out of that assistant role. I moved into a marketing manager role. Then I moved into a business development role. Then I moved out to the West Coast to take on marketing for Google X. What I can tell you is a couple things. One is that my first couple years at that company, if there was anything that wasn't getting done, was a problem for somebody, or was a hole, I raised my hand every single time. And so many of those times, I had no idea what I was raising my hand for, and I didn't know how to do it. And then I built relationships and had asked like for coaching, for training, for like mentorship, but I constantly raised my hand to do some things. And so I got a reputation as somebody who was willing to dive into things that were messy, that didn't make sense, even if I didn't know how to do them. And then I would deliver on them. I was relentless about building culture in the company. I now I lead a team of 60 marketers, and culture is like the thing I wake up every morning and worry about. Like, are people feeling connected? Are they happy? Are they learning? Are they growing? Um, so I constantly was looking for those things and culture. And I just decided not to be afraid about trying the thing that somebody put in front of me. When I took the position to lead marketing for Google X, my husband and I were married for a couple years. We were living in on the Upper West Side of New York. We had all our friends around us. We absolutely like loved our life. We uprooted everything and moved to California. I had never lived in California. Everything I knew was on the East Coast. It was kind of scary. It was pretty overwhelming. The job was like unlike anything ever, like working on connected eyewear and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I kind of just decided I'm not going to be afraid. And it was the same thing when I got a call from the Obama administration. I remember I was asked, have you ever thought of using your talents to serve your country? And I was like, nope, but I am now. So like really just kind of leaning very hard into new opportunities, pretending I was fearless even when I was afraid. I'm not going to say this was about being fearless. It's about like pushing the fear aside. Um, and not being afraid to fail. And I don't say that lightly because I am a perfectionist, like so many of us. And I've had the perfectionist like gene in me since I was probably 3 years old, and I fight it every day. But learning that it is like okay if not everything goes exactly how you thought it was, and that sometimes the left turn is exactly where you needed to go.
That was actually really insightful. Thank you so much.
So the Google story is a little creative. I don't know how they dig like people's random applications out of the bin anymore, but I am forever grateful that they did for sure.
That's amazing. Thank you.
The other thing that I would say is I don't, everyone talks about networks and nobody likes the word network and networking, but like relationships are so, so important. And as soon as you stop thinking about network as this like icky thing and start thinking about it as like, what is wrong with having like a whole bunch of awesome acquaintances? Because that's really what your network is. It's people who know you, they respect you, and when you need something, are going to pick up the phone to answer, and vice versa. And when I got in this role, the CMO position that I'm in it's a complicated one. Healthcare's hard, and like I said, I'm only been in it for the last couple years. I have called so many of my former like 2009 Google colleagues who've now gone off and done all sorts of amazing things, and they just pick up the phone, haven't talked to you in 10 years. How is it? And vice versa. I get the same from them. And this doesn't need to be that you're building like this best friendship with every person that you ever meet, but know that for the most part, people want to help good people. They want to help smart people, and they want to help people that are working on hard things. And they're inspired by people that are working on hard things. And you just don't want to be shy about leaning into that and building really strong, awesome relationships.
Definitely. I think that takes a lot of pressure off of like networking. So,
Yeah, like don't be scared. Like, do not be scared about it. And like the worst thing that happens, you reach out and someone doesn't reply.
right.
And honestly, half the time when someone doesn't reply, it's because they're just really busy. And like I say to everyone, I'm like, have no shame in sending another email. If you send two and they don't reply, fine, maybe it's just not a priority. But like everyone is busy. Everyone's got stuff going on. Most people really do want to help like the people that they've encountered through their lives.
For sure. Thank you.
It's Any other questions I can answer? I love answering questions. I'm happy to tell more stories. I have a slightly more practical thing to talk about, which I think is probably for anybody who's on the comm side or the marketing side, the media side as well. Maybe just even on if you're on the journalism side, you're looking at it from a different perspective. One of the things that I think has become really common over the last several years, and it was sort of born out of the tech industry, but if you think about the most iconic way to look at this is, have any of you ever watched when Apple launches a new product? Have you ever watched any of those clips when there's like the big, I forget what it's like, the WWDC or something, it has a bunch of letters in it. They have their annual summit and they launch the product. So it's like this whole moment, it's this launch moment. Launch moments, maybe I'm biased. I think from my view, they've sort of been born out of technology very much because of Apple. So like we're launching this new product and it becomes a thing. They're actually really critical moments in most companies now because things are moving really fast and attention is really hard to get. So a lot of times what companies are trying to do or organizations are trying, we did this in the government, so I shouldn't say just companies, but rallying around moments that have some level of significance, whether you are rolling out in the government, it was like often when we were rolling out a new, I don't want to call it a policy because it's not like the federal government makes a policy, but sort of like a new initiative, a new, not always an executive order, a new way of looking at the world, a new way of thinking about a problem. In technology, a lot of times it's product. In healthcare, actually, a lot of time it's a partnership. These sort of launch moments for when you are in marketing, when you're on the communication side of the house, pay attention to those. Pay attention to those and create a sense of ownership around them. I have a really strong belief that the story that you can tell around something carries as much weight as the actual product experience partnership that you deliver. Because it doesn't matter if you have the best product in the world, if nobody understands it, or nobody learns about it, or nobody uses it, who cares, right? And so it's super, super important when you have those moments where something new is coming out or your company's getting really proud or your organization's getting really proud of something that they're doing. If you are in a marketing communications role, it's your opportunity to rally all the energy of the organization into that advancement that is happening and make sure that you get the attention and the understanding, not just the attention, but the understanding of what it is you are trying to do. I have to say it is like one of my biggest frustrations right now. I obviously like pay a lot of attention to politics and I just listen constantly at the way that things are said and I'm like, oh, like no wonder the memes are the things people are grabbing onto. No wonder people are believing nonsense and they're believing disinformation and misinformation and it's only going to get worse. It's because many of the people that have the intelligence and the information that we all need to know don't spend as much time thinking about how to get someone to understand it. And I have this debate a lot of times with people who are quick to sort of poo-poo on the influencer industry, and there are certainly a lot of flaws in it. But at the end of the day, people's attention is going to social media platforms, whether we like it or not. We can try to resist it on an individual level, but en masse, this is how people are getting information. There's a lot of flaws in it. We could certainly talk about for a very long time, but you have to meet people where they are. In the same way that 50, 60 years ago, a Norman Rockwell painting that went on the cover of a magazine may have conveyed an idea, a concept, a social movement in a way that news articles couldn't and long form pieces couldn't, and like your neighbor couldn't. It was that message through an image, a message through art. I think we really, all of us who overthink this stuff and value communications have to constantly evaluate how do people actually want to receive information and am I meeting them where they are? Because people are overwhelmed right now by information. And as a result, they're grabbing onto the easiest possible thing to digest. And it is our job in this industry to make sure that we are giving them that. I saw a couple weeks ago that I don't remember if it was I don't know if it was the New York Times or another, it might have been The Economist, but was hiring like a visual storyteller position, and there were multiple of them that they were hiring for different verticals to make sure that they are creating content that people are actually going to watch and they're actually going to learn from. And I think not discounting the value of that is so important, even when you can get frustrated on the other side of why isn't anybody reading the 7-page Atlantic magazine article? Why aren't they watching the documentary? Why aren't they watching PBS NewsHour? Well, they're not. They're not, and we could talk about why that is, but we also have to find more ways to get people the accurate information that they deserve. And I think that's a responsibility of anybody who's in this field in media and communications and marketing.
Thank you so much, Janine. This has all been so informative, and I love how you shared like all these nuggets of your experience and um, all the different roles you've had. Does anyone have any last questions? Um, Anthony.
Yes. I was wondering what kind of resumes, what kind of interviews, what stands out for you um, when you meet younger people, when there are, right, like your Google experience might not be something that everyone else can replicate, but what else kind of stands out and makes you excited about like digging into someone's past or something along those lines that might be applicable to everyone else?
That's a great question. So I want to give you like a little perspective right now of what it is like to be on the hiring manager side of the house. So my company, we're hiring a couple roles right now. And of course, like LinkedIn is a way that we get the word out about these roles. So I will regularly bubble up the roles that my team is hiring for and say like, hey, we're looking for a great product marketing manager. Or if anybody's looking now, we're looking for a great integrated marketing manager. So reach out to me if that's something that's of interest. I'll bubble those up, and immediately after one of those posts on LinkedIn goes up, they always get the most like traction and engagement, unsurprisingly. And then I get a flurry of LinkedIn networking requests. And one of the things that I always say to people is that's totally fine. I think it's a really smart idea to actually try to get your name in front of the hiring manager, because then if they that also shows up on it's marketing, right? If that shows up on a spreadsheet, someone's like, I think I saw that name before. One little trick I would say though is write a personal note. Don't just send through the LinkedIn request. Put something in that message that talks about why you're excited about the position or why you're a good fit about the position. And I promise you this works. I have a VP who works for me right now, hired him 2 years ago. I had never met him. He was not referred. He sent me a LinkedIn message and it was just perfectly crafted of like, this is what I care about and here's how I can help you in this role. It's going to make you stand out from the other like 1,000 people that are applying right now. And you would be surprised. I would say, I just did it recently and I think I got something like, I don't know, 35, like within like 10 minutes after posting it inbound. Not one of them had like something personal. And I was like, I'm not going to go through all 35 people's profiles. So that's one, like as much as you can personalize, if you can ever find a warm introduction, these are just for getting your foot in the door. Try to find a warm introduction. Most people, again, coming back to people want to help you. Like if there's like any sort of loose connection, people will usually be like, hey, I don't know this person, but they reached out. Maybe you could take a look at their resume. In terms of when it comes to like actually interviewing, the things that I am looking for right now in conversations with people is people who are not afraid of change and uncertainty. And that can come through in so many ways in the stories that you tell in an interview. They can be personal stories, they can be about school, they can be about work. But we are just not operating in an environment right now where if you are gonna struggle with change, at least in like the type of environment that I'm working in, you gotta embrace it, and you gotta be okay with like, hey, this thing I thought we were doing this way, it's gonna go that way. So I'm always looking for that. Um, very, I always want to hear the cues of how somebody worked in a team, led in a team, functioned in a team. Because in marketing, as I was just mentioning before, this is just not a solo mission. You just don't. There's like nobody on my marketing team who sits at their in front of their computer and like works by themselves for 8 hours a day. So I'm always looking for the teamwork. And the last is someone who has like dug in a little bit on our brand and our work. I'm not going to grill you on it. I'm not, but I am going to ask a question like, hey, what of our content have you seen from the last couple months that you liked? I will almost always say, like, give me a critique of our website. What do you think? Like, what do you think is not clear? How would you do this differently? Is there someone in the competitive space that you think is doing better than us? It's not because I have an answer in my head of like, oh, you better say X. It's just to know that you spend some time learning about what we're doing. The example I'll give it when I was at Google years ago, because people like really didn't know how Google made money back then. I can't tell you how many candidates we would ask, tell us how Google makes money, and how many people would come to these interviews and say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how Google makes money. And we were like, okay, well, that's like kind of a sign that you probably haven't done the right research. Doesn't mean you need to study like for hours before the interview. It just shows like that, showing that interest, that curiosity, like it really does set you apart from a lot of the candidates.
Thank you.
And I love a thank you note. I'm very old school like that, but I always love a thank you note. I know people say not everyone responds to them, but like I do love a thank you note.
Thank you. And I just want to echo the part about the LinkedIn messages. It does work. I got my first job at Rutgers through a cold LinkedIn message, so +1 on that. And thank you again so much, Janine, for taking the time to speak with all of us today. And thank you, everyone in the audience who asked all these great questions. And yeah, I'll be on for a little bit if anyone has any further questions, but I don't want to keep you all too long, so have a great night.
Send me a message on LinkedIn. I will respond. Thank you.